But do
made
you
that
think, though,
clear.
and you can still answer the question, but I want to jump off of what Laz said, that black folks are just too doggone sensitive when we talk about some of these characters? Now follow me here. All of a sudden, Denzel's in Training Day. I knew when they were in the coffee shop, oh, he just won an Oscar right there. But he wins it, black folks like, well, he should have won for Malcolm X. I don't know why he had to win for that one. Why he had to play a negative cop? Why the white cop had to be positive? Why couldn't the black cop had to be? And so, I mean, you sit there, I mean, you talk about film. People sit here, I mean, you got black folks running around right now mad and saying, oh my God, Tyler Perry, he's Conan. And I'm going, my goodness, do we understand there's a difference between a character on the screen and what's happening at home?
Can I jump in real quick?
Go right ahead. Then I know he wants to go ahead. Go ahead.
The reason why I believe that there is a responsibility that we have is because when I went to France, I had no idea I had French fans. And when I walked outside of that hotel and it was, you know, a couple hundred white people outside waiting to take my picture, I may have been the only brother that they have ever met face to face. You know, and obviously, you know, there are black people in France. I'm not saying that there
Tony
aren't.
Parker?
No. But, you know, my point is that there are places that they don't know black people. They just know the images that they are given, and they believe them. So it's our job as entertainers to be responsible in the images that we create.
Yeah, I agree. I was going to make the point that in several communities, the only opportunity that some of us has to see someone in a positive light is what may be a distance away from them. So you're not able to walk down the street to see someone that you may have the ability to emulate. So we had to be careful about what we put out there for our youth, especially when you think about the current state of our family units and the single-parent homes and many of the other things that are going on. So I do agree that there's a need. Everyone should exert a level of caution in understanding the roles that they portray and how they carry themselves, because something that was said earlier that I believe strongly in, regardless of your role, I believe that anyone can be a role model. I believe that whether you're a leader in your fraternity, in your church, or in the community group down the street, you can serve as a leader and allow our youth to see a positive image. And I really think that what we should all be about is trying to create an image so that our youth can see alternatives. Because one of the things that we often face is if you grow up in a certain community, all you see is a certain type of behavior. So it's impossible to dream something. I shouldn't say it's impossible, but it's hard to dream something if you can't see it. So if you have the ability to see other options, it can enable you to dream and create plans and goals to further yourself.
But don't you think that we are having the reverse conversation in that here we are saying, well, if I don't see anything near me, I need to be looking afar. But the fundamental problem is what's near you. The reality is the people you're seeing every day, those are the folks you interact with, those are the people that you actually see. And so if we are so desperate to have to find a role model in a character in a film that's fictional, to me, the indictment is exactly what's happening right in our very eyes.
Right, no, I agree. I want to mention something about being a role model. As was said, you know, there aren't a lot of black men being fathers in families. And that provides a fundamental problem because in my neighborhood, I live on 76th or 63rd and Kimbark in Chicago. As I look in my neighborhood and I speak to different schools, we have Chicago folks
only
here.
in Chicago. Everybody else say they from Chicago, from Atlanta or Houston. Why Chicago people always got to give an address?
Because I'm from the South Side.
I grew up on 86 and Asheville. Why? They the only folks give a whole address.
Hey, that's how we do
in
it.
a 500 block of like. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I ain't.
But no.
Y'all know I ain't lying.
No, you're right. But what I'm saying is I talk to a lot of schools in my community, and what I see is a lot of black children that do not have role models, specifically their fathers. And so they look to other places, such as to artists and rap and actors and athletes. And the thing is that when it comes to these specific actors, and not all actors are bad, don't get me wrong, not all rappers are bad, but when they go to look at TV, they see a lot of rappers wearing their pants below their legs, you know, cursing. And is that what our real society looks like? I want to make a point. If you look at the National Black NBA, this is what we are doing as black individuals, okay? Absolutely. Let me repeat that. This is what we are doing as black individuals in our community. And my point is that I wish, and maybe it's up to us, to show some of the youth what's going on in this room because there's so much power in this room that they can't even see.
But what you also say, though, that part of the problem when we have this dialogue is that individually, some of us are kind of quiet in exactly where we are. I'll give you an example. We talk all the time about being a positive role model. I can't stand a punk man. I just can't. I mean, I see a dude not taking care of his kids or being a husband. I'm sorry. And you know, I got a couple of sisters married to some punk husbands. Y'all got some sorry family members. Y'all, okay, whatever. And so, for me, I don't tolerate that foolishness. And so, I've jammed them up on some stuff. You're not going to walk in my house with your pants hanging down. You're not going to walk into my house disrespecting my sister, talking all crazy. So do you think that too many of us, though, we don't want any static? We don't want to check somebody. We don't want to pull them aside and say, sister, you know what, this is not how you're supposed to operate, because we don't want to get anybody's business. It's part of the problem that those of us who are doing well and things are nice, that we are so afraid to check our own, but then we complain about them in the car ride to the airport, how jacked up they are.
You know,
and have any of you checked your family members?
You definitely do have to check your family members, but, you know, to go back to the point earlier about role models in our community, sometimes you just may not have the luxury of having a role model in your immediate circle, whether it be family, you know, or your neighborhood, and you have to look elsewhere for somebody that inspires you. You know, when I was a kid, you know, I looked up to entrepreneurs, people who did it on their own, who their stories, you know, exceeded their situation at the time, and I saw myself as one day being the same type of person. You know, so I think that there's nothing wrong with people looking outside of their community when within yours you just may not have it present.
Well, I think it's, you hear some celebrities, whether it's athletes or people of notoriety, sometimes make the comment that, well, I'm not a role model. Your parents are for that or whatever, and I think that's absurd. Because when you think about the point you just made around everyone doesn't have the luxury of seeing an actor or the president of a college or an executive in their market. So what they have may be that person that plays basketball. Right. So how you carry yourself and how you portray yourself plays a role in how our youth are seeing you, and they will emulate that, especially if there are no other opportunities for them. So I think everyone should see themselves as a role model, especially if you're in the public light. If you're viewed by millions of people playing football on Sundays, you should consider yourself a role model. If you're an entertainer, you should consider yourself a role model, because you're viewed by those even when you aren't even aware of it.
And role model doesn't necessarily always mean positive. I mean, you could be a negative role model as well, but you still are a role model.
Absolutely.
Right.
Be aware. Exactly.
Here's our next question I want to get to, folks. Are today's African-American youth at greater risk of failure than previous generations? A yes, B no. Now, don't be honest. Don't be sitting here with the prayerful answer. Give the real one. Ooh, I hope it's A. Wow.
I agree.
Greater risk, 86.3% say yes, 19.1% say no. Why do you think so, Doc?
I think there are two reasons. I would have said yes, too. And I think it's really discouraging to say that, but at the same time, if you look at what's happening in our education system, there's fewer and fewer students are having access in the African American community to high quality education. That in itself puts them at greater risk for failure, because you have to have literacy, you have to have access to a high quality education to be successful in a knowledge economy. And then there are some things that I think students, young people today are doing that place themselves at a disadvantage. We were talking a little bit about this backstage in terms of self-presentation, how you dress, tattoos. You know, there are things that create an impression instantly for others that do put you at a disadvantage.
Now, here's what's interesting for me when they talk about this education topic that you brought up. Miriam Wright Ellerman, they released their State of Black Children report earlier this year, and she talked about that in so many cases, you have black kids going to school not even knowing 250 words. And so here we are talking about change the educational system, deal with the teacher, deal with an administrator. But the question I keep going back to is, when do we deal with their teachers from 0 to 5?
Yeah.
Because if we're talking about a greater risk, that's the fundamental problem, and that's us. You can't blame it on anybody else. That's somebody raising a child. And Jeffrey Canada says that what we have to do, frankly, is begin to deal with that child in the womb, because they are even in the womb behind a white child.
There are certainly child rearing practices that any parent can engage in that not all of our parents do. For example, speaking to your child, engaging in conversation, just as you were preparing food, talking about what you're cooking, how you're cooking it, just vocabulary. You know, it's said that the brain is developing most rapidly in the first 3 years of life, and what you expose children to during that time period has a lot to do with their readiness for school.
You know, I grew up in a home where I was required to speak the King's English. My mom, to this day, if I go to my mom's house, Charleston, South Carolina, and I go in there speaking a certain way.
Charleston, South Carolina.
Yes, sir.
Like we fixing to go to the store.
If I go to my mama's house and say we fixing to go somewhere, she will check me today.
Now, will she let you say mama, or will she make you say mother?
No, I could say mom.
Okay, I'm just checking.
But trust me on this one. We were required to speak the King's English because her belief, and she instilled in me, was it is about communication. It is about how you present yourself. Because that first impression that we spoke of, sometimes you only get a few minutes to form an impression. And if you approach a scenario where you're coming at someone about you're fixing to go do this, or some of the other things that we sometimes can say, people form conclusions about who you are, what you're about, without really having an understanding of you. So I believe strongly in speaking to your children, ensuring that they are using the King's English.
And that's why I raised the question about when I talk about role models, because for me, I'm sorry, you can sit here and you can say Oprah's my role model, you can say all of that. I'm sorry, for me, the person who fed you, clothed you, bathed you, and took you behind the school is your role model. I mean, that's just the way I look at it. But when you talk about the education part, seriously, I was in the car, and my sister was driving, and my nieces were in the car, and one of them said something that was totally jacked up. I said, whoa, hey. What was up with that sentence? My sister says, why are you tripping? It's the weekend. I said, whoa, what? When? You get the weekend off from talking? And so I go back to, Ashley, you can jump back, I go back to the point I raised. I stopped them, and I would not allow them to use broken English on Saturday. Right. Because it is likely to happen on Monday.
Exactly.
And so, again, it is part of this, our role to say we have to police our own, watch our own, raise our own, check our own, because we just can't depend on somebody else doing it. And is that your idea of what it means to be a real role model?
I agree. I want to add something. You know, in my house, I grew up with my mother and my father, and my mom always told me that education is the #1 key to success, right? And so as I'm growing up, I learned that, I have to educate myself, because that's one thing nobody can take away from me. But as I started doing research and talking to more schools, I asked a student in class one day, I was like, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? And some of the young ladies in class said, I want to become a nurse. I want to be a doctor. And I'm like, yes, this is what I'm talking about. But another guy responded, and he's like, I want to flip burgers at McDonald's. Now, in this situation right here, I actually left the room because that impacted me so much, because I knew, just by interacting with this kid, that he had so much potential. And one point I want to make is so many people don't realize their true potential, right? They can essentially be catalysts for change. So I came back in the room and I said, you know what? Who told you that? He said, my mom told me that. I'm like, why? What does she do? She works at McDonald's. She says, I can only do as much as what she's doing. I said, you know what? With all respect to your mother, that's not true. You can actually own McDonald's, right? And be responsible for those that are actually flipping those burgers. Mm-hmm. And so what I'm proud to say is I checked back at the school a couple, months later, and they said that he used to be a problem child within that school, right? And just by a young black man going to the school, he's actually started to change his life around. So my point is that we have to go in and we have to go in these communities and help, because if we don't do it, who else will?
Well, you make that point.